Really a good resource, what's realistic. Dan Ryder is going to address that topic, and known Dan for quite a while. Involved, actually, it was probably some initial discussions between he and I that originally got us going on this whole idea of the Food Energy Coalition, along with the other folks that came along. But he is the utilization person with the Department of Natural Resources Forest Service, and I think I left my book somewhere with his credentials, so I apologize.
They're minimal. I think I'd rather stand here.
Okay.
So, pointer. Thanks. Good afternoon. To me, this is amazing to see a room this size filled up. Those of you who know me well know that we've been chasing after wood energy for 9 years. And thinking back to the early days when I was in a room full of energy professionals, renewable energy experts, and we're kicking around ideas of, well, what should Maryland get behind? And as we went down the great big table, wind, solar, all the obvious ones were mentioned. I happened to throw wood out on the table and literally got laughed at. So from that point to this point, this is very encouraging. So, heard a lot today about different technologies, different applications, how do you pay for it, what makes sense from a technological point of view, from a political view, policy view. Now, what I'd like to talk about is what makes sense from a resource point of view. And before we even get into any of that, it's real important, can't stress this enough, really need to define what it is that we're talking about. We've heard a lot about pellets today. My humble opinion, I think the market for pellets in Maryland in the very short term is going to be restricted to residential. There's absolutely no reason why pellets could not be applied at the commercial or institutional scale. Just don't see that happening overnight in Maryland. I think the low-hanging fruit in Maryland is at the commercial and institutional scale using chips. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. Also note that we're not talking about making electricity only. Okay, in the trade, it's called a standalone power plant. It's not what we're talking about. Nothing against them. It's just not where we're focusing our effort. I think Maryland can easily accommodate standalone power plant if that's the policy direction that we want to go. I think the resource is definitely there, especially on the lower eastern shore and far western Maryland. It's just, we chose, this is not the direction where where the coalition is going to throw its support. Standalone power plant, they come with their own team of lobbyists, lawyers, and bankers. They don't need our help. So let's define that. Large plant, what's that mean? In my mind, it's 50,000 tons or better per year of wood chips. What we are talking about are thermal systems. We've heard it before today. I was really, really heartened to hear it mentioned multiple times. The policy, the energy policy in Maryland, and for that matter, for the nation, we all talk about electricity, we all talk about transportation fuel, and we're not talking about the biggest single piece of the energy pie, and that's thermal. Heating and cooling, and we also throw into that mix combined heat and power. Combined heat and power, let's put it this way. First thing you do is you figure out, well, how much heat do I need? And then you meet that demand. And then after that, then you say, well, gosh, now I actually have a scale where I can very affordably add a turbine to the mix and maybe make some electricity. So that's combined heat and power. That's how those things are designed. Typically, thermal system is much smaller. You're talking about anywhere from 500 tons per year, maybe 10, 15,000 tons per year. So very, very small, relatively speaking. The key to all this is to meet that need. We're very well positioned. We're already making the wood. It's already out there. We're just not using it. We already have the producers. It's just that they're sending that wood to some other market, or they're throwing it away. So, now that we know what we're talking about, now let's talk about what we have to talk about. Jay mentioned it in his talk. One of the very first questions that's going to be asked is, well, where's the wood going to come from? And who's going to supply it? And what's it going to cost? When does it run out? What everybody's really asking, though, is, okay, you can show me where the wood comes from today, and that means it's going to cost this much money. But what's it going to cost tomorrow? And until you can answer that question, you really don't have a project. So what I'd like to do today is just demonstrate that all of those questions are very easily answered in Maryland. Maryland should be, as far as project developers, we should be viewed as a ripe opportunity. So let's start with the basic resource. Oh yeah, by the way, there's a lot of numbers in this presentation. There's only one number in this presentation that's my number. All the other numbers I pulled from true bona fide experts that I can document heavily. And I'd be glad to do it if anybody cares to see it. 334 million tons of forest biomass in Maryland. That's a lot of wood. We're growing over 2.5 times more wood per year than what we're using, and it's everywhere. It's literally in your backyard. The suppliers, again, they're everywhere as well. And who are they? They're your tree trimming companies, they're your loggers, your sawmills, your land clearing guys, even the landfills. These are businesses that aren't relying on an energy project to keep them in business. They're already in business. They're already making wood. It's just not going to an energy outlet. So, everybody wants to know, well, how much is really out there? So this slide and one other slide is where I'd like to spend a lot of time. When you look at all the individual suppliers, and then you make estimates as to, well, how much do they produce? What we come up with is over 1 million green tons per year. By the way, I mentioned one of these numbers as being mine. That's that number. That's a conservative estimate. 324,000 tons per year from tree trimming. All these other numbers come from other people. Highly credentialed, very well-respected people. All right, so let's go through this a little bit. Over 1 million gross tons green per year. If you notice my math, I threw out urban. That's municipal solid waste. There's a lot of political bugaboos about that. I said, all right, let's just take this off the table. We want to show a very conservative estimate. One of the reasons why you show a conservative estimate, I think Jay will back me up on this. Anytime you're talking with a banker type, the very first thing he does is he takes your estimate for your fuel and he cuts it in half. He says, well, we're a bank, we can't afford to lose money, so if you say there's 1 million tons, we're going to plan on there only being 500,000 tons. So to meet that, here's what I did. I took the 900,000 green tons, adjusted for moisture content, put it on an equal basis. This is being bone dry tons. And then of that, I said, okay, Here's how much is actually in the landscape that's already being produced, but how much of that can the energy market might actually capture? So in my low estimate, I said, well, let's just say that the energy market, competing with the paper market, the mulch market, and all the other markets out there, let's say that they capture 20%. Pretty low number. And then on the high end, I said, well, how about if they get 80%? So that explains my range. Now those numbers look pretty low. And that's a good thing. Like I said, I intentionally wanted to be conservative. But let's just keep in mind, these are dry tons, even at 95,000 dry tons, call it 100,000. Green tons, it's 200,000. For a moderately sized thermal application project, on average, you're looking at 20 different projects across the state. At this point, I'd be happy with 5. So even our low estimate can support 20 projects in Maryland? Yeah, I like it. So who are our suppliers? I'm just going to roll right through these. Tree trimming companies. Keep in mind, all the wood coming from these guys is a byproduct. They get paid to trim trees, not move wood. A lot of them have to pay to get rid of their wood. We're talking about reversing that, turning a cost center into a profit center. Loggers, 50% of the tree that they cut down out in the woods, they leave in the woods. Why? There's no market for it. Sawmills. Everybody always looks to the sawmill as the supplier. They're looking in the wrong place. They already have markets for their wood. It's not that it's not available. They don't need you. You're going to have to compete for that. In a lot of cases, you're going to get it, but you're going to have to overcome their already existing market. Wood waste facilities, these are tricky. These are great natural sources of supply, but in terms of making estimates, well, they're getting their supply from all of the above. Great aggregators, though. And an aggregator is nothing more than somebody that buys wood from a lot of different individual suppliers, creates an economy of scale that then allows the aggregator to, in turn, offer long-term contracts. Again, it all comes back to the financing. So here's another slide I'd like to spend a little bit of time with. One of the big questions that's always asked is, well, okay, this is how much wood is out there today. Here's the makeup of the supply, the suppliers. Here's the basic economics. Here's the political lay of the land. But that's 2012. What happens if these things become wildly popular? Are we going to vacuum up every last twig in the state and denude all of Maryland of the forest? These are real concerns that people have. And the answer to that is no, of course not. And, rather than people just take my word for it because I said so, just boggles my mind how anybody could say that. That was a joke. The real answer to that is, frankly, it's economics. It's going to keep these things, poor choice of words, but in check. Keep in mind that this is a free market. So wood as fuel is still going to be competing against all the other fuel types. That hospital, they don't have to go with wood. And frankly, they're not going to invest $3 million in a feel-good project just to feel good. You're going to have to demonstrate some real economic positive benefits before they spend that money. The feel-good side of it's just a bonus. So the very first thing you have to do is demonstrate that, okay, if I go with wood today and I'm going to, and by today's prices I'm saving money, that's great. But how do I know that 5 years from now I'm still saving money? So as wood becomes more popular, then within the wood market itself, you're injecting competition. So right now, what do we do with the waste wood that we have in Maryland? You know, Asplin shows up in your town after the derecho, grinds up all the things that just knocked your power out. Where does that wood go? If it doesn't get blown into a heap in the neighbor's backyard, it might go to one of these aggregators or wood recycling facility. Well, what do they do with it? The best that they found to do with it so far is mulch. Okay, so when we start selling wood as fuel, what happens to the mulch market? And at some point, somebody's going to say, well, I'm willing to pay more for this wood than what it's worth as a fuel type. I doubt that that's going to happen. I think what's going to happen is what we're going to see is we're going to have energy plant over here competing with energy plant over here. And at some point, they're going to say, well, wait a second. You know, when I first invested in this, it was $30 a ton for the wood. And then the new plant gets proposed, and then when you run the economics, they're going to say, well, you know, if you build that plant, it's going to create some scarcity in the marketplace, and in order for you to win, you're going to have to be willing to pay $42 a ton. And then somebody's going to say, well, you know, that doesn't pencil out. So let's go with another fuel type. And then that wood plant, wood plant number 2 doesn't get built, keeps the pressure off, the world is happy. Banks require those analyses. You're not going to build one of these things unless you have a very robust, bulletproof analysis done that not only looks at today, but looks at tomorrow. Tomorrow being 15 years down the road. Distance matters a lot. You're not going to vacuum up all of Maryland. You can't afford to. These things are small scale. Because they're small scale, well, just to speed this up, let's say you put in a fairly good sized plant and you need 5,000 tons of wood a year. Big deal. In the world of wood, 5,000 tons is next to nothing. Nobody is going to go out and become a wood energy supplier just to meet a 5,000 ton per year contract. You can't do it. What it represents is a secondary source of income to somebody that's already in the business of making wood. So if the opportunity goes away, it's not going to be any big deal to that producer. He'll just drop back and sell back into the markets that he was traditionally selling into. So it's a very fluid, very dynamic marketplace. And then always keep in mind, we're talking about byproducts. Nobody's going to go out and wake up in the morning and say, gosh, I have to go out and make wood fuel today. They're going to go out and say, I have 5 trees that need to be trimmed. And part of my cost structure is the school down the road is going to take these wood chips off of me, and it's going to reduce my cost, which allows me to bid a little bit lower on that job. That's how this is going to work. This is a slide you can look at later on your own, but basically what it shows is what are the business drivers for each of the different supplier types. And you'll notice that none of them say fuel price. So, now that we've looked at the economics and hopefully have made a substantial case that, the economic sustainability is self-correcting. What about the ecological? So being a forester, you have to be an optimist to be a forester. Years ago, we got together and we said, you know what? This wood energy stuff just makes too much sense for it to not take off one day. It's going to take a little bit of time to convince everybody, but eventually we're going to get there. And this is really going to happen in Maryland. So we were thinking about, well, what might be worrisome to some people, and what do we need to address? What problem do we need to solve before it's even a problem? And one of those issues was, how do we ensure to people that just don't know the industry, that we're not going to go out there and vacuum up every last little twig in the state. So what we did is we did two things. We commissioned a study to look at what is the economic, political, and social opportunities for developing wood energy in Maryland. 210 pages, I believe. 210 pages later, we answered that question. And then as an offshoot of that, we looked at, well, how can we ensure that we're not going to damage the resource in the process of, doing a better job with our energy? So what we did is a real fuzzy picture. I'm sure you can't read it. But basically, we developed best management practices for using wood for energy. In other words, when we go out into the woods, into the forest, not the cities and towns and landfills and all that, but actually out into our natural forests and use this market as an opportunity to improve that forest, how do we know that we're not applying too much of a good thing and we inadvertently damage the forest? So we developed BMPs for that. And we specifically looked at what do we need to do to protect the soils, what do we need to do to protect nutrient cycling, wildlife habitat, and water quality. This is online. It's easily available. We were one of the first states in the nation to put this together. Happy to say that our product was used as a model by other states as they developed theirs. And one of the things that we did is we actually developed a risk assessment analysis that anybody can apply. This document was written not just for the forester, but also for the logger and, frankly, the landowner, so that you can basically do a self-assessment. Walk out onto your property, use the tools provided here, and say, you know what, I have a high-risk property, a medium risk, or a low risk. And then also provides tools for, well, how can I design a timber harvest to minimize or ameliorate the risk associated with taking a lot more of the biomass off the site to serve an energy market. It's actually a really nice document. So, true to form, I tend to babble a lot. Really, when you boil it down, there's only two main points that I think we really need to focus on at this point in time in terms of asking the question, well, what is actually sustainable? First off, we have oodles and scads of wood in Maryland. We would have to develop one heck of a wood energy industry to even put a dent in what's out there. I don't think we need to worry about overtaxing the resource. Secondly, these thermal systems, well, for that matter, any system, not just thermal, but, a power system too. Nobody's going to build anything until you can prove that the resource is there. I don't mean intimate or suggest or here's the back of the envelope. Bankers are conservative thinkers, and you have to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that not only is the wood there today, but it'll be there tomorrow, and at what price. And you have to get into not only is the wood there, is it available, and who's supplying it? So I think not only is the resource there, there are so many opportunities for checks and balances. I don't think we need to concern ourselves at this point in time or any point in time that we're going to unleash the lion and that this becomes so wildly popular it does damage to existing industries or the resource itself. With that, I guess it's Q&A time.
Thank you very much. Someone have a question besides John?
John asks good questions.
Hey Dan, Paul Lewandowski with AFS. Just a little bit of observation. What you said is exactly right about fuel supply. That's the number one issue when I meet with a potential user, end user. Where am I going to get my fuel? What's it going to cost? Even before they talk to a bank, sometimes they just want to know, and it's the unknown. So, having been building these systems for over 20 years, for a lot of forest products companies, we actually have a database of forest products companies that we keep that could be potential suppliers. When we meet with somebody in a locale, we get 3 of them on their letterhead to say, we produce X amount of tons per year that we're not selling to anybody right now. We'll give you a range in the $25 to $35 range at this point, and you can be assured that we can sell you those tonnage right now.
Yeah.
So that way you overcome that part. Later on, if they need, the financing needs even more, then there's actually history. I actually had to do a 20-year history on pellets, wood fuel, natural gas, oil, all of the fuels for a project in New England for a medical center. And actually wood use in Pennsylvania, there was a 15 meg power plant that when it started 22 years ago, they were paying $14 a ton for their wood chips. They just stopped operating just this year in Pennsylvania, mainly due with the death of the renewable energy credits and the low value of it, and the low cost of electricity was killing them. But even so there's something to talk about too, as you do the political aspect of this and how you're going to support this. But when they were done operating there, they were still only paying about $27. So what other fuel has remained over 22 years that flat and upward cost? So I'm just backing up what you're saying there about fuel availability and sustainable forestry practices. Now, if you want to see the opposite of sustainable forestry practices, look at all of the forests out west that they don't touch because nobody wants them to touch them. And when there's a lightning strike, they lose them by the hundreds of thousands of acres. And that particulate's going into the atmosphere uncontrolled. Is that what you want instead of control?
Just a couple comments on that. One of the reasons why foresters are so excited about wood energy is the fact that it does offer the opportunity for an incredible tool in our toolbox. For years, we've had to walk by, a forest with high potential, but overcrowded, stocked with, not the perfect mix of species that ideally we would like to see in there. And our hands are tied as terms of what can we do to improve it because I have a market for the material. As far as price stability, I took out of this presentation the slide trying to shorten it up. I actually tracked price history for wood and then overlaid that oil. And you can do it with electricity, you can do it with gas, you can do it with all the other fossil-based energy systems. And you see the volatility, you see the spikes, you also see the sharp upward trend in the fossils. What you see with wood, it goes up with time. It's a very gradual curve. And most importantly, it's highly predictable. So if you're a fiscal officer at a school and you're trying to figure out, well, golly days, I'm putting the 2014 budget together. Maybe I need to park an extra $500,000 in reserve money because I don't know what the oil bill is going to be. Whereas if you were on wood, you could say, well, I know exactly what my energy bill is going to be in 2 years. So now I don't have to waste all that money parking it in some account just to hedge bets. Now I can go out and buy new science books for the 7th grade. Having that predictability is one of the greatest assets of going with wood. because it is predictable.
Thank you very much, Dan.